It is 2014, and the United States government announces one of the largest asset forfeitures in global history.
The Nigerian government has signed a fresh agreement with the U.S. government for the return of over $23 million looted by former military ruler Sani Abacha. It adds to the $317.7 million Abacha loot repatriated from the U.S. to Nigeria in 2020.
Over $480 million seized. But this money did not come from a drug cartel. It did not come from an organized crime syndicate in the traditional sense. It came from the ghost of a military dictator. General Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria for 5 brutal years. But while the world was distracted by his ruthless suppression of political opponents, the tragic executions of activists, and a relentless grip on military power, Abacha was building something else in the shadows. He was building a financial empire, a kleptocracy so vast, so incredibly coordinated, that it required the active compliance of Western banks, global oil conglomerates, and a shadowy network of highly sophisticated bagmen. This is the story of the cartel Sani Abacha built, and how they drained billions of dollars from the giant of Africa. When Sani Abacha seized power in November 1993, he didn't just change the leadership at the top. He hit delete on the entire democratic system. He dissolved the National Assembly, banned political parties, and wiped out every single local council.
The interim national government is hereby dissolved. The national and state assemblies are also dissolved. The state executive councils are dissolved. The brigade commanders are to take over from the governors in their states until administrators are appointed.
With the stroke of a pen, elected governance in Nigeria simply ceased to exist. To complete his takeover, his fiercest critics were silenced. Labor unions were broken. Journalists were jailed. But this absolute political control served a dual purpose. By completely suffocating the press and neutralizing all opposition, Abacha ensured that absolutely no one could turn a searchlight on him or his family. The national vault was left entirely unguarded, and so the great looting began. To steal billions of dollars from a sovereign nation, you cannot just walk into a bank with a bag. You need a system. Abacha's system was remarkably simple, yet devastatingly effective, and it relied heavily on his national security advisor, a man named Ismaila Gwarzo. Gwarzo operated as Abacha's chief bagman. He would draft official letters to the dictator, urgently requesting massive sums of money for vaguely defined national security operations. In one such memo, Gwarzo demanded $30 million to be wired directly to a Geneva account, falsely claiming that America had, quote, gone berserk, and that funds were desperately needed to fight critics overseas. Abacha would swiftly sign off on these letters and forward them to the Central Bank of Nigeria. The central bank, operating under the terrifying shadow of the military dictator, completely bypassed all standard government procedures. They didn't ask the Minister of Finance. They didn't check the national budget. They simply handed over the cash. Sometimes, the money was wired directly to offshore shell companies. But often, the theft was much more brazen. Millions in physical cash and travelers' checks were handed directly to Gwarzo, who then drove the money straight to Abacha's private residence in Abuja. Waiting there was Mohammed Abacha, the dictator's son, ready to launder the cash through foreign businessmen and offshore accounts. In total, more than $2 billion was stolen from the Central Bank of Nigeria alone using this exact, repetitive method. But the Abacha family could not move this much money by themselves. They needed a cartel, a sprawling network of fixers, foreign bankers, and sophisticated financial criminals. Enter Abubakar Atiku Bagudu. American investigators later described Bagudu as the instrumental architect behind the complicated financial transactions used to launder the proceeds of the conspiracy. Bagudu set up offshore front companies everywhere, from the British Virgin Islands to Switzerland and Ireland. He was the most prolific money mover of the syndicate, a man who would later transition seamlessly into modern Nigerian politics, serving as a senator, a governor, and a federal minister. The cartel extended its reach into every lucrative sector of the Nigerian economy. They exercised absolute control over government contracting, extorting massive kickbacks from foreign companies. When a French civil engineering firm struggled to collect over $460 million legitimately owed by the Nigerian government, an Abacha associate offered a very simple solution. Pay a 25% kickback to the Abacha family, and your payments will magically restart. The company agreed. Within 2 years, $97 million was funneled into a Swiss bank account controlled by the cartel. Perhaps the darkest chapter of this financial pillaging involved the health of Nigeria's own children. In December 1995, Nigeria's First Lady, Mariam Abacha, went on national television to launch a highly publicized immunization program. It was framed as the mother of the nation, giving Nigerian children a fighting chance against diseases like polio, measles, and tuberculosis. But behind the scenes, it was just another massive scam. Her son Mohammed and his associate Bagudu heavily inflated the cost of the vaccines. Out of a $111 million contract with a French firm, the cartel casually siphoned off $66 million. This blood money was moved with the perfectly legal help of British businessmen and deposited straight into Western accounts. Even when compliance officers at global banks flagged the transactions as bearing the typical characteristics of a massive fraud, executives pushed the deals through anyway, noting that the client was a prominent, long-standing customer. The brutal reality is that the Abacha cartel could never have functioned without the active, enthusiastic complicity of the West. While global leaders stood on international stages expressing deep moral outrage over Abacha's human rights abuses, their financial institutions were happily holding his money. Abacha had over 140 accounts holding more than $750 million in Switzerland alone. He had hundreds of millions stashed in Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and the United Kingdom. And then, of course, there was the oil. Shell oil, operating in the devastated, polluted Niger Delta, wasn't just drilling crude. Internal corporate memos later revealed they were actively assisting the military dictator, operating as an intelligence arm, and even providing honorariums to the exact military units violently cracking down on environmental protesters. The United States and Europe completely refused to embargo Nigerian oil because it would hurt their own economies at the pump. Abacha had successfully turned himself into a necessary evil. He had the oil the West desperately needed, and he provided the West African peacekeeping troops for foreign conflicts, doing the dirty work so Western soldiers didn't have to. But the cartel's unchallenged reign came to a sudden, absolute halt. On the early morning of June 8, 1998, General Sani Abacha began gasping for air. Despite the desperate attempts of his personal physician, the dictator died mysteriously in the presidential villa. Without its ruthless enforcer, the entire house of cards collapsed to the floor. The new democratic government initiated a massive global hunt for the stolen billions, hiring Swiss lawyers to track the maze of accounts. The investigation uncovered the staggering scale of the theft, an estimated $5 billion drained from the country in just 5 years. The Abacha family fought back relentlessly, spending millions on high-powered lawyers in the UK and Europe to deliberately delay the repatriation of the funds. Ultimately, a deeply controversial secret deal was struck. In exchange for cooperating with the return of a portion of the stolen loot, the Nigerian government granted the Abacha family perpetual immunity from prosecution. They kept their passports, they kept their freedom, and the charges were simply wiped away. Today, the legacy of the Abacha cartel remains a gaping wound in Nigeria's history. The billions that have slowly trickled back to the country over the last 2 decades have often vanished into the murky waters of modern political corruption, with ordinary citizens rarely seeing the benefit. The state-owned refineries that collapsed because their maintenance funds were looted remain broken. The infrastructure that was never built still hinders the progress of an entire generation. Sani Abacha may be dead, but the cartel he built, the perfect blueprint of utilizing absolute state power to blur the line between a national treasury and a private bank account, proved a terrifying point. It proved that with enough oil, enough fear, and the quiet complicity of global banks, a nation can be robbed blind in broad daylight. This is the history, and this is the tragedy of a nation that still cannot entirely escape the shadow of the cartel.